Hey everyone, this is Vince Twelve signing in again, and I'm putting this at the beginning of the video as a little heads up. This video is being released for Huda Hoodlum's birthday. Yes, today is his birthday. I recently got a notification on Skype and I decided to make a small video doing a shout out to him, but then I thought, well, I have a recording from something that I did a little while back that was done because of him, so I decided to put that out while I was at it, and I hope you enjoy it. It was a reading of the story Showers, or The Showers. I can't recall who the author was, and I initially read it because Huda Hoodlum did such a good job hyping it up to people in his videos that I decided to see if it was as good as he made it out to be. And I was pleasantly surprised when I found out that it was indeed. It was actually now one of my favorite creepypastas. And as one, also I share his liking of one of the characters in the story. Now I have to warn you straight off the bat. This is an off-the-cuff reading, and I do tend to stammer a lot. One of my weaker points, more so than others, is that I am not very skilled at reading things out loud, which is one of the reasons why I tend to focus on objectively terrible stories, because not many people care if I stutter over that than a really good story that people are getting engrossed in. But I just decided to put it out if only because I thought it would be interesting and just to show my appreciation for someone who I've grown quite fond of in our limited interactions. So, happy birthday, Hudo. And just to answer your question that you probably are really thinking of, yes, I am still angry at you for betraying me and doing clockwork with Jacob when you promised to do it with me first, you son of a bitch! Happy birthday.
Hello everyone, it's Vince Swell saying it again, and I'm going to be doing something a bit different today. No Krabby Pastas, no dramatic readings of shitty stories. Well, I don't know, we're going to have to go wait and see for that one. I'm reading this story called The Showers, and it wasn't really recommended because I don't think we've actually ever talked to each other for more than 2 seconds on outside of a YouTube comment, but I saw on Hood Hoodlum's list of his favorite creepypasta characters, he mentioned character from this story, The Showers, and how he considered him one of the better characters in creepypasta. It is not just that he said it was a good character. He said that The Showers was, I believe he said to the effect of it was his favorite story. And I was curious when I decided to take a look at this, and this will be my first impression of the story as a whole. And I don't know what's causing that random. Let me see. There's going to be a random clicking sound every now and again, and I really wish I could figure out what it was, but I don't know. One day I'll find the cause of it, and I'll try to do my best to put a stop to it, because I can tell it gets annoying. But there's The Showers. It doesn't have a credited thing, or let me go down and see if all the way down to see if there's a. I don't know. By Clover 101. I'm not skipping my head. This was the pasta of the month, which I don't know. Anything I hear goes in that old so prestigious category, but let's begin. Part 1. Every area in all parts of the world has those specific area-specific urban legends that just refuse to die. Whether the stories about a haunted asylum on the outskirts of the city, a creature that lives in the nearby woods, or a ghost that still haunts a lonely stretch of road outside of town. There's always a common thread within these tales. No one has ever been to these places, seen the creatures, or witnessed any of the hauntings with their own eyes. There are members of every generation who will proclaim that they know someone whose brother's best friend's sister went to that snakes and spiders and is so scary that no one has ever made it all the way through. Is that a reference to No One House? Those same people will swear by these stories without ever having been able to provide a shred of evidence or a name of someone who could provide the proof the proof claims simply because everyone around here knows that it's a true story. The storytellers eventually pass the tales down onto children who modify them just enough to keep up with the changing times, and the cycle continues. I'm as I'm as skeptical as anyone when it comes to these stories, seeing as how I was a junkie, seeing as I was like a junkie when I was younger, constantly I'm really sorry. I'm not very good at reading things out loud. Constantly searching for more terrifying stories about whatever area of the country I was living in at the time. I made up and spread stories about a haunted pizza parlors in New York City, and my cousin's encounter with the Jersey Devil, or how my grandfather encountered a feral human-like demon creature in the woods of Colorado. I even broke one rule with these stories by putting myself in them. This took guts in hindsight because I had to make sure. This took guts in hindsight because I had to make sure that I always told them in the same way. Surprisingly, no one ever called my bluff. I like to think that I had some wonderful contributions to various urban legends around the Midwest and northeastern states. I moved around a lot. There was always a surge of joy whenever I would wander in the halls at school and hear one of my classmates retelling my stories to another one of their friends, adding little bits here and there like a massive game of telephone. I knew, of course, that these stories were complete fiction, but I stood my ground whenever someone asked me about them. I would even manage to act a little bit, speaking with a shaking voice or looking scared when I recount a situation that I supposedly experienced myself. I suppose this aspect of my childhood has led me to my current predicament, which I will recount in full for the internet to take from it what they will. I have laid this little introduction out as a sort of disclaimer, aimed particularly at those who will call my story into question. I have been like the boy who cried. I have been like the boy who cried wolf for years, but I assure you, with every ounce of honesty and integrity that I have this time, the wolf was real. From my introduction, it was probably apparent that I moved around the country quite a bit in my middle and high school years. Neither of my parents had anything to do with any branch of the armed forces. They simply didn't tend to hang around any given place for too long. I suppose it has some sort of effect on me, but I wasn't hurt by it or anything of the sort. Growing up, I was a complete ham. I made friends very easy. I was often the class clown, and because of that, I was often disliked by my teachers. Again, this was never an issue, as I was usually in another state by the time the next semester rolled around. My friendships were often fleeting, as were any positive relationships that I ever had with my teachers. Because of the events that followed, my memory of one teacher in particular is probably slightly skewed, but I will attempt to give at least the least biased version of our friendship as I can. Mr. Mays was one of my social studies teachers in the early years of my high school experience. Being older now, I can understand how horrible children are to deal with at that age, and I respect him to no ends for the way he was able to connect with his students. He seemed like the rest of us. He talked like us, made pop culture references that were current, listened to cool music, and sometimes he wouldn't say hell or damn while he was giving a passionate lecture about Native American history or something like that. A teacher that swore, even a little bit, was the epitome of cool. It's the epitome of cool. I keep mispronouncing that word. God damn it. I'm so sorry. It's the epitome of cool in a freshman high school. Damn you, Red Letter Media. My memory of Mr. Mays always mostly stemmed from the way he really got into anything he was doing. The instance that is still very vivid in my mind, of course, around Halloween of my sophomore year. The instance that was still very vivid in my mind, of course, was around Halloween of my sophomore year. Mr. Mays had the typical teacher decorations around the classroom, smiling jack-o'-lanterns, black cartoons, typical and boring in the mind of egotistical high school students. However, on the 31st of October, when most of the teachers were rolling their eyes at the fact that teenagers still took the dressing up in costume on Halloween seriously, Mr. Mays took the whole cool teacher thing to a new level. We walked into the classroom and were surprised to find the blinds drawn. Sheets over the new window. Jack-o'-lantern sitting on a stool in front of class. Mr. Mays sat at his desk, just watching the students come into class and take their seats. He didn't have to ask anyone to be quiet because the moment everyone walked in the door, they were either too excited to care about petty conversations or too confused to be bothered by them. The students took their seats as Mr. Mays began the lecture. He spoke quietly to set the mood, and took a seat and chair right next to the jack-o'-lantern in the center of the room. "Today is probably my favorite day of the year, class," he said in a monotonous voice. "Halloween is my favorite holiday, and I want to share with you exactly why I love it so much." One girl raised her hand with a concerned look on her face. I'm pushing the due papers for your I'm pushing the due date for your papers on next Tuesday," said Mr. Mays without bother looking at the girl, who slowly put her head down. Looking around at the students with a hint of embarrassment. The class erupted in quiet cheers as Mr. Mays waited for the inevitable silence. He began his story immediately after the class had calmed down. I don't know why I keep skipping words. I will attempt to recreate the amazing story that Mr. Mays told us that day. The way in which he told us this story rendered the horror junkies speechless and the rest of the class terrified. The same girl who raised her hand to ask about the paper was holding her knees to her chest by the end of it, a look of terror on her face. The important thing to know was what the story was about. The specifics slipped my mind and aren't too relevant. I'll try to recount the parts of the story that matter the most, but don't hold me to it. Basically, Mr. Mays and his friends set out on a road trip around the country after graduating from college. They took a truck, loaded it with camping gear, and set out to sightsee the entire summer. Well, I actually do remember the story. I started to listen to Mr. Creepypasta. I didn't get around to finishing it. I actually do kind of remember. I remember this introduction, is what I'm saying. The group went from the Poconos in New Jersey, the Poconos in New Jersey, around the coast of Florida, New Orleans to California, and up to Washington. From there, they went to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, and then back home in New York. I don't know why I'm sorry. The concept of the freedom to travel anywhere had the entire class hooked in an instant. Mr. Mays was the coolest teacher ever in my eyes. Being adventurous college kids, the group didn't bring a map. There were no time constraints, so they just kind of drove in the general direction that they wanted to go, and eventually found a town to stay in or some place that looked interesting. He told us after spending a week in Colorado, he and his friends had to travel through miles and miles of corn, plants, and more corn. He assumed that they were either in Nebraska or Kansas when they decided to pull their extra cash and stay in a hotel for the night. They settled into the motel. They settled into a motel in some town. It said a hotel, so that's okay. That's my fault. He settled into a motel in some town that Mr. Mays could barely remember the name of when he and his friends realized that they were somewhere near his grandfather's farm. He wasn't entirely sure what it was. But being adventurous college kids, they decided to get a quick refund from the motel and try to contact their friend's grandpa. They were unable to get a hold of the grandpa on the phone, so the group figured that it would just be fun to show up. Mr. May's friends was adamant that his grandparents would take him in and feed them without a moment of hesitation. So the group set out with an hour of sunlight, seeking the salvation of a comfortable house to stay in. In Kansas or Nebraska, wherever it may have been, there wasn't a whole lot of natural markers that could guide lost travelers. Any directions given to someone who didn't live around the area basically amounted to go a couple miles to the corn and take a right and go down a dirt road to the other corn. There should be some wheat on your right. So, as in the case of most scary stories, the group got lost. Never wanting to admit defeat, they drove into the night, not making wrong turns every 5 minutes until they found themselves in a wooded road that Mr. May's friend was certain that his grandpa lived off of. Mr. Mays described the road basically as a dark path to hell. I wasn't entirely sure how true that was because he got very excited and a bit ridiculous with his explanations, how the trees almost tried to grab the car and the red eyes of countless animals looking at them from the darkness. Regardless of the typical horror tropes, regardless, the typical horror tropes worked on most of the class. Everyone was terrified. So the group of guys drove on this dark road for about 15 minutes before they came to a clearing with a small building with lights in it, and what seemed to be a silo. They figured that at the very least the people who lived there would be able to help them find where the guy's grandparents lived. The whole idea of everyone knows everyone in these hick parts of the country fueled this hope. They pulled the car up near the building, realizing when they were out of that car, it appeared to be like the kind of places where one would store a whole bunch of chickens, not a home. Still, the lights were on, so they figured that they would give it a try. They approached the building as a group, looking at the semi-open sliding door to find a big empty room. Hanging fluorescent lights lit the room like it was dead. Still couldn't see a soul. I don't know why. Stop it, Najee, stop. There were no cars, but one of Mr. May's friends was convinced that he'd see someone as they pull up. So I decided to go inside to see if there was an office or something where someone might still be working. Why else would they have this huge place lit up like that? There were no doors on the inside of this building. Then again, it was just a giant empty hall. So the group roamed around the property and over towards the silo. As they got closer, they noticed what appeared to be a cellar door. At this point, I remembered Mr. Mays telling the entire class to learn from his idiocy. He told us that he hadn't seen many horror movies at the time, and he didn't think twice about approaching a creepy cellar door in the middle of a dark, scary foreign place. He said that approaching that door was one of his biggest regrets. Mr. Mays let the whole class know that he was going to tell as much of the story as he deemed appropriate about the experience. He was going to tell us as much as he deemed appropriate about the experience. He felt that we were mature enough to handle it, but advised anyone who was squeamish to leave the class early. Several students quietly gathered their things and walked out the door, a couple of them being stoners who saw the opportunity to smoke behind school before their next class. I didn't give the announcement a second thought. Like I said, I was and am a sucker for this kind of stuff, and Mr. Mays was telling a story better than anything I had ever conjured up. I wanted to learn from this guy, even though I didn't believe much in the story. After the class had thinned a bit, Mr. Mays continued with the story. He told the remaining few that he and his friends opened the cellar door, releasing a smell that he only described as the most putrid thing that my senses ever experienced. The group was no longer concerned with finding the owners of the property, but was now set on finding the source of that smell. They went down the steps into the cellar, which was lit by single balls placed sporadically along the ceiling of a long hallway. No one spoke. Things got too strange. The walls were lined with strange metal sheeting, similar to roofing on farms. The hallway itself was crooked, and the ceilings constantly lowered and rose, like a tunnel that was hastily dug and never touched up. There were sections where the boys had to almost crouch in order to pass. The worst part, Mr. Mays told us, was that the light bulbs continuously flickered, sometimes acting like a strobe light, making it very difficult to move through the winding, unstable hallways. In hindsight, he was certain that his mind was playing tricks on him, but remember seeing flashes of things that couldn't be there. He said that when you are focused on something, or when you are that nervous, your mind can do that to you. It can simply revolt, showing you things or people that aren't there. He continued to describe the hallway. and I was on the edge of my seat. The halls were windy, and seemed to go forever. Mr. Mays guessed that they were somewhere under the creepy forest that they had driven through and when they found the door, but he couldn't be sure. He said that they came upon a door after walking for what felt like a mile. It was simple and wooden, but it looked like it belonged outside of a suburban home. It had a nice design, seemed to be freshly painted red. It had a very nice doorknob and a very nice knob and knocker on it. Maybe I need to stop listening to music. Maybe that's what's doing it. It was a door that belongs at the entrance of a nice house, not one that would be sitting in a dirt tunnel in the middle of nowhere. His friends walked towards the door, moving carefully because of the flashing light bulb, increasingly uncertainty. Because of flashing light bulb and increasing uncertainty about the stability of the surrounding walls. He turned to the group, at the very least, and attempted to lighten the mood with a laugh before he said, "I probably should knock first." Mr. May's friend grabbed the steel knocker and hit it against the door several times, mockingly, but quietly uttering, "Is anyone home?" The group waited for about 30 seconds before their tension broke. The guy next to the door shrugged his shoulders and went to walk back to his friends, but as he did, the light bulb between them surged and exploded. The boys shielded their eyes and looked back to the lone friend by the door. As he lowered his hands, one of the metal sheets of the makeshift roof dropped. The edge of the sheet fell directly on the boy's forehead, slicing it open and sending a wave of blood down his face. The impact apparently knocked him out, and he fell back against the door, knocking it open in the process. The entirety of the group rushed through the dim light to their friend, bringing it to his friend's side. He lifted the guys into his arms, immediately taking off his jacket and putting it on his forehead to attempt to stop the bleeding. Once the group calmed down, Mr. Mays noticed that the arm he had been bracing his friend's head was soaking wet. He was confused about this and was attempting to sort it out when one of his friends started talking. He said something along the lines of the lights. It was very weak. It lit up the room just enough to see the shape of tens of people standing less than 10 feet from them. Mr. May's friend else, but one of the bulbs to their right flickered to life. Let me attempt to explain at this point, let me interrupt at this point and say, basically, he could say, "Let's go jump off a cliff, guys," and you would want to respond, "Alright, Mr. May, show us the way." It's a ridiculous statement, but it gets the point across. He was a charismatic guy completely. He was no longer attempting to spook anyone. I could tell that this section was difficult for him. Either he was a very good actor, or it was really a terrifying memory for him to relive. He told us that the light bulb came to life and illuminated the group of people in front of them. In the dim light he could see children, at least 20 of them in the visible light. They were all dressed in nightgowns that looked to be tattered and worn, stained dark with something. Their hair was long. Every single one of them looked like they hadn't had a haircut since birth. Some of the children were almost obscured by the length of it. Every single one of them didn't appear to have showered or had a nice bath in their entire life. Mr. Mays told us the most terrifying part of the whole thing was that none of the children were moving. They were all standing, staring, most of them only visible by the faint light flickering. Our children began to step forward. His friend grabbed the injured one and lifted him out of the room and into the hallway in an instant. Mr. Mays took another second to move and had difficulty finding his bearings. He reached to his left and attempted to find a wall to lean against. Ended up finding a handle, and he pulled hard, never losing vision of the children. He bolted for the door right as he noticed what he had grabbed onto. A shower head protruding from the cement wall, reaching a foot into the room. There was something leaking from it. It was too dim to tell what it was. He realized it had been leaking onto him, but he didn't care. There were now children stammering towards him, with as an animal cried in the distance and his friend was seriously injured. As he left the room, he made a point to emphasize that he could make out several more shower heads on the wall near the single dim light bulb. This is why I call them the showers. And shit, Mr. Mays told the class. I was transfixed, sitting as forward as my desk would allow, bracing for more. I slammed the red door behind me, he said, and ran through the hallway faster than I have ever run before or since. I made it back to the car, and we drove out of there like a bat out of hell. A couple students snickered at his use of the word hell. So when you're out trick-or-treating tonight, make sure you know exactly where you're headed. And don't go out to any abandoned farmhouses. I mean, there aren't any around here, but you're smart kids. Except Jerry. The class laughed and the mood lightened as the bell rang for passing period. Mr. Mays turned on the light and thanked everyone for listening, reminded them about the paper due next week, and told us to have a safe and happy Halloween. Students all around me were abuzz with theories about the story as they just heard. I bet it was some sort of crazy Nazi hideout, said one girl. I think they were just ghost babies that were killed by a dog, said another. I couldn't theorize in the slightest. I was still caught up in the moment. The way that Mr. Mays had told us the story and the detail that he included in it left me feeling that we didn't get the whole story. A couple days later, I stayed after class and asked him how it really ended and what happened to his friend. He laughed and said his friend was fine, and it was honestly, and he whispered that part, probably due to some of the drugs they were on at the time. Mr. Mays winked at me as to say, "Don't tell anyone about the drugs part, kid." I smiled and left. I lived in that town for another couple months, and then was rapidly moved halfway across the country to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I twisted the story around and told it around campfires as I got older, and it was always a hit. But I always changed the ending, letting the friend die of blood loss or being dragged away by the children. It wasn't until college that I got a chance to talk to Mr. Mays again. I went to the college in northern New York, not for any reasons associated with the story. College was a fun time for me. I continued being the same ham as I always have been. It wasn't until some time around my junior year that I ran into Mr. Mays at a bar I frequented. Initially, I couldn't be sure that it was the same person laying with his head buried in his arm at the bar. I couldn't be sure that the person I saw laying with his head buried in his arm at the bar was Mr. Mays. The only trap that grabbed my attention was the sweater he used to wear on his birthday during class. The shirt simply read, "It's a birthday boy." I'm the birthday boy. You see. The man took a second to look at my face. "That's the wrong too. This is the worst story ever." No. The man took a second to look at my face before he smiled, putting a hand on my shoulder and said, "Hey there, son. How you been? Have been or we're ever gonna get." It took me a while to realize I was an adult having a conversation with another adult. Every time I had spoken to Mr. Mays previously, I had been in the student-teacher relationship. But now, I was just having a drink with a friend at a bar. My friends eventually left, and I continued to drink with Mr. Mays. He told me all about his divorce and his kids, things that I never would have asked or cared about previously. But now I cared. He was a real person to me, not just an idol anymore. This was a guy who had real problems, not the infallible teacher that I once thought he was. It had been several hours before I thought about a story of the showers, and I told him about my history with urban legends, scary stories, and he just laughed. When I mentioned the story that he told us years ago, he almost seemed uncomfortable. He finished his whiskey and signaled for another, and then turned to me and got very serious. "Listen, Jack, I don't know why I kept telling that story year after year." He slurred. His words were slurred, or my hearing was messed up. We were both significantly blazed at this point. That was what my therapist told me to do when I was younger. I had to tell people. I had to tell people and to come to grips with it or some shit. He took a big swig of his drink. Wait, your therapist? Mr. Mays laughed heartily and looked at me. Of course, Jack. You don't think something like that wouldn't fuck your person up? I was confused but smiled nonetheless. Things had just gotten very strange. But, I mean, you said you were on drugs, all on drugs or something, right? No one was too terribly hurt and you were all okay, right? Think I'm here right now. I was puzzled. Look, you feel with 1,000 questions I wanted to ask him, but I let him carry on. Tim fucking... He didn't make it, Jack. He laughed. His laugh starting to turn to tears. They fucking took him. They did. I don't even know. The cops told us that we were drunk. And he wandered off, got taken by wildlife. He didn't know. He didn't see it, Jack. I was completely stone-faced at this point. Mr. Mays was carrying along but I didn't. His friend disappeared. I didn't know. I wish they'd found the body, though. That we could have shown them. He sighed. That's a bad place, Jack. I don't know anything else to say. It's a bad place. He carried on for a couple minutes about his friend and the fun that they had before they went on that trip, and I let him talk. It was only a few minutes later before his phone rang. Oh, sweetheart. He whispered into the phone. I'll be out in a second. He gagged. Love you, baby. The person on the other hand hung up the phone, and Mr. Mays got up to leave. It was nice seeing you, Jackie. You got a good head on your shoulders, boy. Make sure you use it. He began to walk out of the bar. Mr. Mays, I yelled after him. Yeah, Jack? Where'd you say all that showers business took place? Where? Hell, I didn't mention it. Somewhere outside of Broken Bow, Nebraska. Fucking hell on earth if you ask me. Mr. Mays walked out of the bar waving to me, running into the wall before eventually finding the door. That was the last time I would see him. I'd never be able to tell him the impact he had on my life, or rather, the impact his story had on me. He'd never know about the trip we took after graduation, almost mimicking the one he and his friends had made. He would never know the things that he saw at that place were real. Why? Well, he died about a month later. His liver failed on him. It's alright though, because his family was with him in the hospital. He got to die around the people that cared about him. And that's all I can ask for a man like that. I experienced that too several years later. That's where my story turns. I experienced that place too several years later. That's where my story turns. The following story is how I came to find the showers and why I will never, ever go anywhere near Nebraska again. I'll finish the story when I'm sober. My memory's clear enough. I'm awake. Part 2. I'm awake now, semi-sober, ready to finish this for you guys, the internet, and whoever cares to read it. I didn't find out that Mr. Mays passed away until a couple months after the funeral service. Initially, I was going to seek out his family in order to send my condolences, but it wasn't as if Mr. Mays and I were the best friends or something like that, so I refrained. I continued through college and graduated a year or so after our bar meeting. Graduating with English as my major was a mistake, but it wasn't exactly something that led me any sort of immediate jobs after college. Now, I had saved a pretty solid amount of money while I was at school and decided that I deserved a bit of a vacation, if you will. I took my spare cash, got together with my college buddy Steve, packed up and hit the road, aiming for somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. I had lived near Littleton, Colorado when I was younger and remember loving the area. So this destination was as good as any. The trip was a success. We made it somewhere around Estes Park, Colorado, and found a cheap cabin that we rented for about a month. The days were filled with lodging, hiking, generally things that involve little to no work on our parts. After our rental was through, we packed up again and headed our way back east. Sometime during this trip, we met up with a couple Mystic Park relatives on one of the local bars. We never typically hung out with them or anything like that. We just had conversations now and then over drinks and food. One night these guys were paying their tab and packing up to leave awful early. Usually there until the wee hours in the morning. When we questioned them about that, they told us that they were headed to a little get-together with some of the friends of theirs, and they invited us. Having little else to do, we hopped in the car and followed them to the party. The party itself was very low-key, and ultimately consequential to the story. However, the most important thing about it was that at some point in the night, we were all sitting around the fire swapping ghost stories. At this part of my life, I wasn't as much of a ham as I was in my younger years, but with a little bit of encouragement, I started on a couple of stories that I remember telling in my youth. Eventually, I made it to Mr. May's story about the showers. Every time I had told it, after hearing from Mr. Mays, I had spiced it up a bit. But out of some sort of subconscious respect for my former teacher, I went straight into the version that he told my class on my sophomore year at high school. The group enjoyed my stories for the most part, the showers being the mutual favorite among partygoers. Steve and I left for the cabin about 5 in the morning, and he asked me about that story on the drive home. I told him all about Mr. Mays, that class, my love for everything horror-related and whatnot, and he suggested that we try to find that place on our return to New York. Initially, I was reluctant simply because I didn't feel like aimlessly wandering through Nebraska for days, looking for some old farm building that was probably demolished at some point. But a couple days before we left Colorado, I told Steve that it sounded like fun. We weren't going to be able to do another camping trip like this for a long time, so I figured that we might as well make the best out of it. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought of it as a little tribute to Mr. Mays, a guy that, in retrospect, helped me realize that I wanted to be a writer. Anyway, we left Colorado and made a long, boring, barren drive to Broken Bow, Nebraska, or hell on earth, as Mr. Mays had put it. We found a motel in town and hung around for a couple days, venturing out 100 miles or so in any given direction each day after that. I remember Mr. Mays telling us that it was somewhere outside of Broken Bow, but I don't think he got any more specific than that. We tried asking the town folks that had information about showers, but we were usually met with blank stares or eye rolling when we told them exactly what exactly this place was. The only person who seemed to know anything about it was an older lady who worked at a gas station on the outskirts of town. I don't recall her name, but this woman was one of those cheerful old people, very helpful and generally interested in what anyone had to say to her. Steve had started talking to her at checkout, and she asked about our license plate, commenting on about the fact that we were very far from home. We had nowhere in particular to be, so Steve and I ended up talking to this woman for about 15 minutes, at which point we brought up our hunt for the place known as the Showers. Initially, the name didn't ring any bells with the woman, which made sense, seeing as Mr. Mays had just given the name after the experience there. But when I began to describe the details that I remember from the story, the friendly old woman interrupted me. Her tone wasn't scornful or mean in any way, but she became very terse and deliberate in her words from that point on. People don't deal with anything relating to that sort of business around here anymore. She told us. That was a long time ago. Following her statement, she attempted to be cheerful again, excusing herself to the restaurant, wishing us the best on our trip to New York. Steve and I returned to the car without a word. Both of us were thinking about what the lady said. Again, she didn't seem to be angry at all, she just didn't want to hear another word about it. We were driving back to the hotel before Steve said something. I mean, if I had to live in a place associated with an urban legend or something like that, I would totally mess with anyone who asks about it, he said. I mean, eventually you get tired of people asking about it, so you just try to scare them to get them to shut the hell up, wouldn't you? I agreed with Steve and kept driving, but the whole experience wasn't sitting right with me. if this was some sort of well-known legend in the area, then why did no one else in town seem to know anything about it? But I managed to shrug it off. Mind you, neither of us was scared of finding showers. This whole excursion on our road trip was more like a scavenger's hunt, a cap-off to an overall relaxing vacation. Steve and I were basically like tourists hunting for the site of a famous movie which a famous movie was filmed or something like that. We went into the whole situation with little to no expectations, and fleeting hope that we would find this place. We spent another day in Broken Bow before we took our next trip to find showers. Nebraska wasn't as terrible as a place that people make it out to be, but it really wasn't all that exciting. Oh, we found a bar and spent some time there, and that was just about the extent of our activity on our day off. When we did get back on the road, we decided that we would make the attempt to stay off the main roads for as much of the day as we could. I knew there was no way that this place was going to be off the highway, and I remembered some detail about a dirt road in Mr. May's story, so we went looking for those. This is a fairly futile effort. Most of Nebraska is dirt roads. Let's see. It was 7 in the evening when we came up on a small but thick forest. I use the term lightly, but for Nebraska, this place is like an oasis. The trees were full and thick, shrouding most of its insides in darkness. The sun was setting. Even though we had run into a few of these random crops of trees, we agreed that this showed more promise than any of the others. There wasn't really a road, but there looked to be a path where a dirt road might have been at some point. So we drove along that. If the car was able to handle the Rocky Mountains, a dirt path in Nebraska would give us no trouble. We moved slowly and carefully along this trail, making sure that to clear any fallen trees on the road that might render the car useless when the sun was setting. It was pretty dark in this place during the day, but when night came, it was something else entirely. I had an inkling at this point that we had found the right place, but I didn't want to jinx it, so we continued onward. I didn't realize it at the time, but the little bits of light that managed to penetrate the canopy of this miniature forest actually did make it look like as if the tree branches were trying to grab the car, just like Mr. May mentioned in the story. I'm still convinced he made up the part about the animal eyes, though. The most aggressive creature we saw in the woods was a dead rabbit on the side of a trail. It didn't have any obvious signs of death. It just looked like it had simply laid down and never bothered to get back up. We drove around the darkness for quite a while before we found a clearing. We had to move several smaller clusters of branches out of the way, but right in front of our eyes right in front of our exit was a giant dead monster of a tree. There was no way we were moving this one, so we got out and turned on the bright headlights in the hopes that we would illuminate the area in front of us. There was a feeling of excitement mixed strangely with fear when I saw what lay 50 feet beyond the clearing. There, lit partially by the headlights from the car and a little bit of light from the crescent moon, was what appeared to be an old barn house. This wasn't a typical barn house. It was larger than the barns I had seen in films and didn't have any sort of crest. It looked like a small warehouse. It basically looked like a small warehouse. I wasn't entirely sure at this point if this was the place we were looking for, but this was definitely the closest we had come. I moved through this bush until I was roughly 20 feet from the entrance, at which point all the growth seemed to stop. I don't know if the owners had done something to the soil or the whole structure had a border around it that was clear of any sort of plant life. I approached the entrance to the building, and a large sliding door as Steve came up behind me with two flashlights. Were you just gonna go in the dark? Were you just gonna go into that, run off into that place in the dark? He laughed. I gave a half-hearted chuckle and grabbed the flashlight from his hands. Mine was a little, but pretty light, pretty bright flashlight. It was the kind that hikers would most likely fasten to their backpacks, just in case they were stranded at night. It worked well enough. I grabbed the metal door with both hands, holding the flashlight in my mouth, and gave it a tug. It moved slightly, creaked a bit, but there was no way I was doing this by myself. Steve came up from behind, his flashlight on the ground, and grabbed the door, and said, 1, 2, 3! We pulled at the door with all we could muster. Once we managed to move it a couple inches, it must have latched back into its trap because it slid easily, with stopping hard with a loud, echoing thud when it was completely open. Steve picked up his flashlight and walked behind me. I had already moved inside. The structure was exceptionally bare, almost troublingly so. I wasn't entirely sure how far we were from the nearest home or small town, but there wasn't even the slightest bit of evidence that anyone had been in this building for years. There was no broken beer bottles or empty bag chips. There wasn't even any animal droppings or eager plants that had managed to grow here. The room was expansive, larger than your average farm, but not the warehouse-sized monstrosity that I believe Mr. May described in the story. I was sure that it was simply a housing area for farming equipment or something similar at that point. Disappointed, I wandered near the entrance while Steve ventured into the expanse darkness. As I was running over the details in my mind, something struck me like a sack of bricks. In Mr. May's story, there was a silo near the barn. I ran outside, my eyes adjusting easily because, at the very least, it was brighter outside. I looked in all directions, running around the perimeter of the building. Surely, if there was ever a silo in this place, it would have some sort of evidence of it somewhere. But despite my hopes, there was nothing but a cluster of thick bushes on one side, bush and dirt everywhere, and the forest that we had come from. I'm sorry, I'm stammering more than usual. I'm kind of sleepy right now. I'm not saying the story's boring, it's just like it's 4 in the morning and I should get some sleep, but I'll be honest, I'm kind of hooked on the story so far. I walked back into the building, frustrated and tired. Steve was still excited, eagerly running around the inside of the building. Even if I could just find a shower head pipe, he said, that I know it'd be true. Then we'd know it was true. Just keep looking with me. I didn't want to ruin his excitement. I had told Steve the story several times, but obviously he didn't realize that this just wasn't the place. The building was weird, yes. It was out of place and oddly pristine, but it wasn't the location of the showers. I let him explore a little bit before I called him on. This is probably as close as we're gonna get, man, I said. But it isn't. Remember the silo? His face went from excitement to disappointment in an instant, like a young child who didn't get the presents he wanted on his birthday. I patted him on the shoulder. It was still cool, though. I mean, we could still tell people that we found it. I referred to my old habits quickly. Steve laughed. Yeah, I guess we could. It is definitely creepy enough. We should get some pictures as proof, you know? I agreed with him. I'm gonna go get the camera really quick, he said as he bolted out of the entrance of the building. I was left alone in the building. It was very quiet when I was alone there. I could hear the faint sound of Steve running through the bush and into the car, but once he was far enough away, everything was quiet. I remember not even hearing the wind or the chirping of crickets as I walked deeper into the dark, a flashlight in hand. I was convinced there had to be something. As I approached the far corner of the room, the sound of my feet scratching against the dirt was interrupted by a soft, hollow thud. I stopped, trying to figure out what it was. I put my foot hard down against the ground, and I heard it again. I stopped one more time, and realizing that the floor that I was standing on was covering something hollow. I walked up to the wall of the room, looking carefully at the floor and try and spot any holes or gaps. As far as I had known, the solid ground that this thing sat atop. So I was convinced it was solid ground that this thing sat atop. so I was convinced that I had found a patch of basement or something. I heard Steve coming back through the bush and as I shouted, "Steve, come over here, it's a hole." As I went to say the word hollow, I hopped a bit, hoping to recreate the sound that he would be able to hear upon entering the door. The second my feet made contact with the floor, it gave out beneath me. I remember the fall is fuzzy, but I recall hearing wood splinter. I remember seeing the light of Steve's flashlight falling away into complete darkness. It wasn't a long fall, but it must have been a terrible position because I know I lost consciousness for several seconds at least. When I woke up, I was staring at a bright light. For an instant, I thought about approaching the fabled light at the end of the tunnel. I was angry at myself. You died in Nebraska, Jack? Wow, you know how to fuck up. My self-deprecation in the afterlife was interrupted by what sounded like Steve's voice. Jack! Jesus, Jack! Can you hear me? Dude, wake up. Please wake up. I managed to lift my head off the floor enough for him to celebrate. The pain in my head was immense, but it was outweighed by the pain shooting through my knee. I knew I had a concussion, but the pain in my knee was more pressing. I looked around until I found a tiny flashlight and sat up and reassured G. I'm okay. I just hurt my knee. Put my head too. Really hard. Oh, thank fuck, Jack. I thought you were dead. Imagine that, though. Dying in fucking Nebraska. It'd be awful. His words made me laugh a bit, but I stopped myself. A slightest shaking in my head made me incredibly dizzy. I guess rope. I sat in front of me. They were smooth cement. There was no way I was climbing out of there. Yeah, get the rope, I told him. It's buried under all our stuff. I think it's in my red climbing bag, but I'm not sure. Steve nodded, telling me to hang in there, and he would be back for a little bit and ran off. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. After the sound of Steve scraping the door above me faded away, I was only able to hear the buzzing that occurs in total silence intertwined with my pulsing head. I pushed myself over to the nearest cement wall and braced myself against it, resting and breathing in deep in an attempt to calm myself. The cement was naturally cold against my back. It was summer, so I only had a t-shirt on, but it felt like ice through that. It felt like ice even through that. Again, this observation was primarily made after the fact. In the moment, it just felt good to lean against something. I sat there, waiting for Steve in this underground basement, and I began to feel uneasy. I felt like an idiot for falling down here. I felt pain from my injuries as well. That all seemed to fade in one emotion in an instant. It faded into one emotion in an instant when I heard what I could identify as breathing. Somewhere to my left. I convinced myself that it was my injured mind playing tricks on me for a few moments until my mind decided to rapidly replay Mrs. Mays' story. When I first heard in my classroom years before, I was more pressed than I was scared. But now, sitting in a dark basement in the middle of Nebraska, I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long time. It couldn't even be summed up as the word fear. As I sat there, I felt all-encompassing dread. I pointed my flashlight to my left, the direction in which I thought I heard the sound. The light didn't reach the other wall. It was too far away. But I was comforted to see absolutely nothing there. I breathed deep for a couple more seconds before I heard another noise in the darkness. It was very quick, and I cannot be sure that it was my own body moving around with my noticing, but I thought I heard a scraping sound not 10 feet in front of me. It sounded like the noise your feet make when you're walking across a dirt-covered floor. Before I could react, I heard the breathing to my left again, closer this time. There was no way this was real. I hadn't seen so much as a spider web in this building. Now I was convincing myself that something was next to me breathing. I was angry at myself for getting so worked up. I told myself that the human brain was constantly hallucinating. I told myself that while in the silence and darkness, my brain will make sounds to fill the gap or make you think that you see things that aren't there. I channeled my inner skeptic to calm myself. It worked. It worked until I saw a flash of something in front of me. I can't be entirely sure of what it was, but I heard the accompanying sounds of feet scraping against the floor, and I began to swell with dread. I decided the best course of action at this point was to turn off my flashlight, assuming if they couldn't see me, they couldn't get me, whatever they might be. I turned off my flashlight and was left in complete and total darkness. The bulb of the flashlight faded as it cooled, and I put it in my pocket, simultaneously pushing against the cold cement as I attempted to stand. I managed to get up to my foot, as I couldn't stand the pressure on my injured knee. I limped to the corner, humming to myself, trying to break the deafening silence. I called for Steve as loud as I could manage, but no response. He was probably back at the car, still hunting for the rope. Had to be a ladder or something, somewhere. I continued to hum, and my heartbeat, which had been beating for almost out of my chest, slowed at a manageable rate. I moved along the cement wall and kept my whole body against it, and the weight off my injured knee. I had traveled what I guessed to be about 10 feet when my head came in contact with something in front of me. I tumbled to the ground. My concussion must have amplified the pain because it was blinding. I reached both my hands on my forehead and felt something warm and wet on my fingers. I searched for a cut anywhere on my forehead, but I couldn't find one. I desperately searched for my flashlight and sat up and tried to get back against the wall. I grabbed the light with my right hand, branching against the wall with the other. I turned around and pointed to the darkness where I was lying. The floor was wet, but the dirt was mottled the color of whatever liquid it was. I tried to get my eyes to focus on the puddle, tried to convince myself that it was blood. I saw blood with my blood when I saw another drop fall into the puddle. Words lacked the ability to describe the way I felt when I heard the drip noise, but I was endlessly trying to convince myself that I was wrong. I lifted the flashlight up again and pointed at the source of the liquid. What stared back at me was a pipe that protruded at least 10 feet out of a cement wall. The metal was rusted and cracked. Little bits of liquid began to seep from it. At the end of the pipe was a simple shower head, aimed towards the ground. You know that feeling when your stomach drops? In this case, I think mine literally got all over my shoe, but it wasn't the least bit important to me. I ignored the pain in my knee and shuffled along the wall as fast as I could. I heard noises, but I can't be sure if it was just the sounds of my own movement or something around me. I managed to duck under the next shower head. It was higher up against the wall, and seemed to be leaking the same liquid that the other one was. I felt like I was moving along something infinite. Every now and then I would have to duck or move under another metal bar, another shower head. They began to pour more profusely, but the liquid was too thick to come out easily. The room began to smell. I remember immediately the way that Mr. Mays described it. I grabbed my shirt and put it over my nose, tucking it onward, but it didn't stop the smell for an instant. It smelled like vomit. It smelled like shit. It smelled like burnt hair. It smelled like rot. I was still moving against the wall when I felt into some sort of outlet. I hit the dirt ground hard, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The pain still managed to break through, though. My flashlight was still in my hand, and I aimed it to examine my surroundings. Sitting in front of me was a doorway. There was a door there, and it looked like it aged now. It had a pretty nice design on it. A doorknob, and a knocker that looked like a snarling demon. Red paint was peeling from it and flaking off it, falling to the ground right in front of me. I clumsily rose and brushed against the door, narrowly missing a hanging piece of sheet metal in front of me. I was crawling out. There was no way I could run. The walls and ceiling were lined with sheet metal, the kind that you would see in the roof and barn. Large pieces of wood seemed to brace the sheets, holding the makeshift tunnel together. I couldn't risk sliding against that and possibly cutting myself on the metal or hitting the wood and causing a cave-in, so I crawled. I pulled myself for what felt like miles, running into walls every now and again because I Because my neck. In relation to the hole that I have fallen through, but I told myself that there was an exit at the end of this. Had I not been crawling, I would have surely hurt myself far worse. There were parts of the tunnel in which the ceiling dripped down maybe 3 feet to above the ground. It hadn't caved in because the ceiling still lined it. Someone had built it like this. Then again, this again is in hindsight. I didn't care at the time. I kept telling myself there was nothing behind me, but I swore I heard feet scraping only inches behind my own. My jeans would brush against my leg every now and again, making it feel like something was touching me. And even now, I still can't completely convince myself someone wasn't. I crawled and crawled until I reached the upslope. With joy, I looked up at me. There was a cellar door. The door was made out of wood, and I knew that this because I could see the light through them. I couldn't be sure, but I thought it might have been the light from the car's headlights. Because of that, I was so immensely happy to find the exit. I crawled all the way to the door and threw my shoulder into it. It budged but didn't open. I began to scream, but my throat was seared in pain. The most I could manage was a harsh crying noise that sounded like a dying animal. Oh my god. I collapsed in exhaustion and pain, my eyes staring up the slits in front of me. I was so close to being out of here. I could taste it. It was at that moment in silent defeat where I heard a noise. Without question, something moving in the tunnel. It sounded like something being dragged across the floor. It would move, pause for a second, then move again. I had nothing left in my stomach to throw up, but I began to gag. I gathered myself slightly and tried to steady my hand enough to focus the light in the tunnel. What I saw, I still can't rationalize. I know what I saw, but I cannot convince myself that it was actually there. I can't stop telling myself I was hallucinating. I saw a child in a dirty sleeping gown. The gown was stained with something dark brown, with occasional splashes of deep red. The child was extremely frail, like the pictures that people might see of a Holocaust victim. I could only make out one eye, brightly reflecting the light of my flashlight. In between huge tufts of long, dirty hair, it reached down beyond the fingertips of a child and was caked with dirt. The boy, girl, not entirely sure which, moved towards me with difficulty. It wasn't breathing hard, but it seemed like every movement of every muscle took every ounce of strength the child had. The thing froze. That thing froze me, though. The thing that froze me was the eye. It was only visible because of my reflecting flashlight, but even in that glint, I could feel anger, or deep hatred, or something like it. At this point, in which the English language really lacks the right words to explain the situation, I could tell that this child meant me harm. Whether it was a hallucination or not, the thing was getting closer. I started to cry. It was getting closer when I heard a voice behind me. "Hey, Jack." It was Steve. I was certain. I tried to talk back, fully intending to say, "Open this door up and get me out right now." But given my current state, I'm sure I sounded like garbled nonsense. I climbed the door and pushing against it with everything I had until finally breaking contact with the child. As I did this, the flashlight rolled down the slope, coming somewhere near the child's feet. Let's see. "What did you see?" the voice said. "What are you talking about?" Wait, what are you talking about? I closed my eyes. I remember hearing a reply along the lines of, "Just look at it, Jack. Tell me what you see." But my own screams of frustration drowned it out. I'm mumbling something like a maniac when my voice told me calmly. When the voice told me calmly, "Rest for a second, I'll get it." The statement took a second to settle in, at which point I closed my eyes tight. "Steve, just please do it. Please, just get it open, Steve," I whimpered. "Just get me out of here." My voice was beginning to get louder. "Steve, goddammit, open the fucking wooden door!" I opened my eyes for a split second and saw nothing but black hair dangling in front of my face. A small glint of a light hidden between the mess of tangles. I slammed my eyes shut and screamed with every ounce of energy on. Open the fucking door! And the door behind me gave way, and I fell into the dirt, taking in a breath of fresh air. My eyes were still closed, but the first thing I did was scramble to find the cellar door and close it. Once I did that, I took in a deep breath and opened my eyes. I saw the barn in front of me, illuminated by the headlights of the car. My head was pulsing in pain, and I was covered in dirt and liquids I didn't even care to know the origin of. My knee, at the very least, was dislocated, but above all that, I was out of the tunnel. I took a deep breath, buried my hands in my hands. Steve, why couldn't you just open the fucking door? I waited for a response, but nothing came. Steve, seriously, I began. I was crawling, I was fucking clawing, screaming for my life. I say as I look behind me. My stomach must have been on the verge of falling out on me, at this point, because it shifted again. The only thing behind me was a large mass of bushes I had seen while examining the perimeter of the building. I was angry. Steve, this is not the fucking time. Coming out of the fucking bushes. I was getting ready to stand up when I heard a yell come from in front of the building. My flashlight bumped up and down in the semi-darkness. Steve was running towards the open door of the structure, yelling my name and telling me not to worry. I must have lost consciousness at that point, because I woke up. Steve was standing over me, desperately trying to wake me up. His words were almost incoherent, at least in my ears. He helped me to my feet and began to walk me toward the car. As we walked away, I saw my flashlight sitting outside of the door. The light was fading. Steve brought me back to the car and then drove to the nearest hospital. I fell asleep, but he told me that he drove around for an hour until he found the main road. I don't think I ever told him the whole story. I believe he thinks that I was just injured from the fall. He never really asked about it, and we didn't stay in contact for much longer. It's not like we deliberately parted ways. We just stopped hanging out after the trip and went our separate ways. I have never been able to fit away as being hallucinations, but there were still many things that don't make sense. The shower heads there were leaking something. The door was real. The tunnel was real. Most everything can be semi-rationalized, but if I try to convince myself that I had a very bad concussion, a very, very bad concussion. But the one thing I couldn't imagine was that cellar door was locked, and then suddenly wasn't. I'm still skeptical as I ever was, but I have ever been. But I believe in what happened to me at the showers. There's no typical ending to my story. I've changed my experience, yeah, but there's no way to change anything about Squidward Suicide were really good stories. Well, I thought Jeff the Killer was decent and Squidward Suicide was great, but time rehabilitates our opinions, and Hoodlum's one of those guys who can look back and see in hindsight where he was wrong, or look things at more critical perspective. But I am very glad that he kind of introduced me to the story, and I'm very grateful. Hoodlums, if you're ever going to watch this video and you're probably pissed off because I was constantly stammering and butchering your favorite story, thank you so much for introducing this to me. This is I was genuinely getting chills down my spine as I was reading the part, especially getting to know this character and whatnot. I also spoke fondly of Mr. Maze, and I won't lie, I had the same kind of reaction to Mr. Maze, because I think a lot of us, those who know, as children, have the one teacher that they love, and growing up and knowing them as an adult, it kind of sat home with me, because I have a number of teachers that I had that experience with. I can remember distinctly going from my first years in elementary school with a teacher I loved so much, then going back to see him when I was in high school or ending high school, and seeing him as an adult, and he'd seen the change. But I was surprised by the fact that he didn't grow. I'm talking about height-wise. But yeah, I love Mr. Maze as a character, so I can exactly see why he put him on the best list. As for the story, the rest of the story of itself, honestly, it says something about the story when I'm actually forming a slight theory in my head as I read that. When I think of the showers, and they even mentioned in the story of itself, the child was very thin and malnourished, as if he looked something like a Holocaust survivor. Maybe these were chemical shower. No, that wouldn't make sense. It's not Germany. This really wouldn't make sense, because this would have to be in that would have to be in Germany. We didn't have concentration camps in America, or at least to my knowledge. But I think would make this story I also want people to bear in mind that I'm reading the story on the heels of another story I read recently, or I was trying to read. I was recently trying to record a story that went by the name of Lethal Passion, written by Guardian Demon on Wattpad. It's a like a 55-page Jeff the Killer fanfiction. No, it's not 50. No, it's 77-page chapter fanfiction. And I was gonna read it for him, use it, and give it a genuine critique. And I was getting so frustrated with the poor writing and bored that I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I just said to myself, you know, let me read a good story, or what is allegedly a good story, and I'm going to decide to read Showered for the first time. And this felt like, I don't know, this felt like going from Twilight to Lovecraftian horror in terms of, I'm not saying it is necessarily as good as Lovecraftian horror, but because I never actually read any Lovecraft myself, and I feel embarrassed to say that, but this was a truly great story. One instance where, like I said, The Wrong Two, and I jokingly said, "Oh, worst story ever," and I think there is some minor, or more, I don't know if I can call it really a tense swap, but it's not really a tense swap, more as a slight change in the tense of the narration. I mean, a tense swap to me is like a kind of like, I always accounted for the same whatnot, but even then, I was so engrossed with the story that, and this is the kind of thing I like about good stories like this, is that minor things like that, like maybe small spelling errors here or there, like you can gloss over them because you're so engrossed with the story that your mind is telling you that it doesn't matter. And I know a lot of people get on Jacob on Bad Creepypasta because he can be a little harsh with his critiques. But at the end of the day, his critiques are mostly based on the fact that those detract from the story, and the stories themselves are not good enough to where that has very few shortcomings from a technical standpoint, and from a storytelling standpoint is strong enough that if it actually had shortcomings that were noteworthy about endings that kind of peeked through. And I was genuinely I know, like, this is a story that's taking place in the past tense, meaning that Jack is alive, but regardless, it says something about this character and the way that the story is written, where even as I'm reading the stuff that's happening to him, I'm pulling through for him to not get hurt or not die or anything like that. And I just really love this story. Big thanks to Hoodlum's Revenge for recommending the story. And I'm not going to rate this pasta. Go read this, because this was great. Phenomenal. Truly phenomenal. And much thanks to, let's see what the name was. Clover10176. You are... Kudos is all I have to say. Kudos. You've written a truly great story.